My name is Vanessa. I'm 28 years old, and I just realized my mother would rather see me homeless than let me keep my father's inheritance. She thought her family meeting was a trap to break me. She had no idea I was the one setting the bait. The scent of cedarwood and old paper still clung to the walls of my father's study. It was a comforting smell, one that reminded me of the rainy Saturday afternoons we spent here, him hunched over his architectural blueprints, and me grading English essays in the armchair by the window. 6 months had passed since Dad took his last breath, yet I still found myself walking softly, as if I might wake him from a nap. Being his primary caregiver during those final 2 years had been the hardest, most rewarding privilege of my life. My blonde hair, usually tied back in a messy bun for my shifts at the high school, felt thinner these days, a physical toll of the long nights spent by his hospital bed. The house was mine now. It wasn't a mansion, just a sturdy 2-story craftsman in a quiet suburb of Ohio, but to me, it was everything. It was peace. The vibration of my phone on the mahogany desk made me jump. The caller ID read, "Mom." My stomach did a slow, nauseous flip. "Vanessa?" Her voice came through the speaker, sounding thin and fragile, a sharp contrast to the booming social butterfly persona she usually wore. "Honey, are you there?" "I'm here, Mom. Is everything okay?" "I've been thinking so much about your father lately," she sighed, and I could almost hear the practiced dab of a tissue against her eye. "There's so much we never settled, so many things he wanted to tell you that he just didn't have the breath for. I've organized a family dinner tonight at the Gilded Oak. Please, Vanessa, for him?" The Gilded Oak, it was the most expensive steakhouse in the city, the kind of place where the bread service cost more than my weekly groceries. "Mom, I'm exhausted. Can't we just do takeout at your place?" "Kyle and Sarah are already on their way," her voice regaining a bit of its usual steel. "It's about his final wishes, Vanessa. There's a secret he kept, and it's time it came to light. Please don't make this difficult." A secret? My father wasn't a man of secrets. He was a man of blueprints and concrete. But the mention of his final wishes tugged at a string in my heart I wasn't ready to let go of. "Fine," I said, looking at the reflection in the darkened window. I looked tired, but my eyes, blue and sharp just like Dad's, held a flicker of caution. "I'll be there at 7. As I hung up, the silence of the house felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the heavy, suffocating air right before a thunderstorm. I grabbed my coat, not knowing then that this was the last time I'd feel truly safe in my own home. The Gilded Oak was exactly as I remembered. All dark leather, polished brass, and the faint, heavy scent of expensive cigars and aged bourbon. I felt painfully out of place in my sensible wool coat and teacher's flats. As the hostess led me toward a private booth in the back, I saw them. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table, her blonde hair coiffed into a stiff, perfect helmet. My older brother Kyle was already nursing a double scotch, looking bored, while my sister Sarah was busy tapping away at her phone, her designer handbag perched on the table like a centerpiece. But it was the fourth person who made the hair on my arms stand up. He was a small, balding man in a cheap suit, sitting rigidly next to Kyle. He had a thick leather briefcase at his feet. "Vanessa, you made it!" Mom said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. Her palm was dry and cold. Sit. We've already ordered some appetizers." "Who's this?" I asked, nodding toward the stranger as I slid into the booth next to Sarah. "A family friend, Robert," Kyle interjected, his voice already slightly slurred. "He's just here to help with some paperwork. Don't worry about it. Order a drink, Van. You look like you need one." The server arrived with a tray of oysters Rockefeller. My stomach churned. We sat in a bizarre, forced silence for 20 minutes, Sarah chatting about her failing boutique and Kyle complaining about his investments.
It was a performance, a thin veneer of normalcy that cracked the moment the main courses were cleared. Mom set her wine glass down with a deliberate clink. "Vanessa, dear," she started, her voice dropping that fake warmth. "We've been talking about the house and the trust fund." I felt my spine stiffen. "What about them? Dad's will was very clear, Mom. You have your condo and your monthly stipend. The house and the primary trust were left to me." "It's not fair, though, is it?" Sarah piped up, finally putting her phone down. Her eyes were sharp and predatory. "You stayed in that house while Dad was sick, sure, but you basically manipulated him while he was on morphine. We're family. We deserve an equal share." "I didn't manipulate anyone," I said, my voice low and steady, despite the roar in my ears. "I was the one changing his bandages and taking him to chemo while you two were in Cabo and Aspen." "That's enough," Mom snapped, the grieving widow act vanishing instantly. She signaled to Robert, the quiet man in the suit. He reached into his briefcase and slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward me. At the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Quitclaim deed." "What is this?" I whispered. "It's a transfer of ownership," Robert said, his voice nasal and clinical. "You sign the house over to your mother. In exchange, the remaining liquid assets in the trust will be divided equally between the four of you. It's a standard redistribution." "And if I don't?" I looked around the table. Kyle was leaning forward, his face flushed with aggression. Sarah was smirking. My mother was staring at me as if I were a bug under a microscope. "You're not asking, Vanessa," Kyle growled. "We've already spoken to people. We'll tie you up in court for years. We'll claim Dad wasn't of sound mind. We'll make sure you lose your teaching license for elder abuse. Just sign the damn paper and we can go back to being a family." I looked at the pen Robert held out to me. My hand shook, not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying rage. "I'm not signing anything," I said, standing up so abruptly my chair screeched against the hardwood floor. "Vanessa, sit down," Mom hissed, looking around to see if other diners were watching. "I'm going home," I said, grabbing my purse. "And if any of you contact me again without a lawyer, I'm filing for harassment." I walked out of that restaurant into the freezing night air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I thought the worst was over. I thought I had won the round. I didn't realize that while I was being ambushed at dinner, the real betrayal was already happening in the dark.
The drive home was a blur of streetlights and hot, angry tears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a ghostly white. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting Kyle's black SUV to be tailing me, but the road remained dark. I pulled into my driveway, the headlights sweeping across the familiar porch of the craftsman. For the first time in my life, the house didn't look welcoming. It looked lonely, vulnerable. I stepped out of the car, the freezing Ohio air biting at my cheeks. As I reached the front door, I stopped, my breath hitched in my throat. The front door wasn't closed. It was sitting ajar by a mere half-inch, just enough for a sliver of warm yellow light to spill out onto the porch. My heart began to thud against my ribs, a rhythmic, heavy drumming. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Silence greeted me, a heavy, unnatural silence that smelled of cold wind and something else. Cigarette smoke. Kyle's brand. I pushed the door open, my eyes darting around the entryway. My coat rack had been knocked over. My father's favorite landscape painting was hanging crooked on the wall. I didn't call the police yet. My survival instinct was being drowned out by a primal, protective rage over my father's memory. I ran to the study. "No!" I gasped, clutching the doorframe. The room was a disaster.
Books had been swept off the shelves, their spines cracked like broken wings. Dad's desk, the mahogany desk he had polished every Sunday, had the drawers ripped out and emptied onto the floor. Files, old blueprints, and personal letters were scattered like autumn leaves. They hadn't been looking for jewelry. They hadn't touched the silver or the electronics. They were looking for the original will. They wanted to destroy the only thing protecting me from their greed. I sank to my knees amidst the wreckage, picking up a photograph of Dad and me at my college graduation. The glass was shattered, a jagged crack running right across his smiling face. A sob escaped me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, sharpening clarity. They thought I was the sweet, quiet Vanessa. They thought because I spent my days teaching Shakespeare to teenagers, I didn't know how to fight. I stood up, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I walked over to the bookshelf, the one that still stood upright. Tucked behind a thick volume of the complete works of William Shakespeare was a small black plastic housing. I reached up and pulled it down. It was a high-definition 4K nanny cam. When Dad's health had started to decline, he began having falls. I had installed a discrete system of cameras throughout the main rooms so I could monitor him via my phone. After he passed, I never bothered to take them down. I found comfort in knowing the house was watched. My fingers trembled as I pulled up the app on my phone. I scrolled back the timeline to 7:45 p.m., right when we were ordering those disgusting oysters at the Gilded Oak. The video loaded. There, in high-definition color, was Kyle. He was using a spare key he must have swiped from Mom's purse weeks ago. He looked panicked, sweating through his expensive shirt, tossing the room with a frantic, desperate energy. Then the camera caught something else. He picked up his phone. "I can't find it, Mom," he hissed into the receiver, his voice crystal clear through the camera's microphone. "It's not here. She must have moved it to a safety deposit box. What do we do?" He paused, listening. Then he sneered at the empty room. "Yeah, okay. If we can't find the will, we'll just make the house unlivable. We'll break her down one way or another." He kicked the desk one last time before exiting the frame. I sat in the middle of my ruined sanctuary, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. My family had just declared war. They didn't realize I now had the ammunition to end it. I didn't sleep. I spent the night on the floor of the study, meticulously tidying the wreckage. Each paper I straightened, each book I returned to its shelf, felt like I was stitching a wound back together. By the time the sun began to bleed a pale, sickly orange over the horizon, the room looked normal again, but the air felt tainted. I knew the peace wouldn't last. The first volley of the day arrived at 8:15 a.m. via a notification on my phone. It was a Facebook tag from Sarah. My heart hammered as I clicked it. It was a photo of our mother, huddled in a blanket, looking frail and tearful. The caption read, "It breaks my heart to post this, but we are desperate. Our sister, Vanessa, has locked our grieving mother out of the family home and is withholding the funds Dad left for her care. How can someone be so heartless? Hashtag elder abuse. Hashtag justice for mom." The comments were already pouring in from old high school friends and distant cousins. "No way! Vanessa seemed so sweet," one read. Another, "That's illegal. Someone should call the cops." My face burned with a mixture of shame and fury. Before I could even process it, my phone rang again. It was my principal, Mr. Harrison. "Vanessa," he said, his tone unusually formal, "I've had several concerning calls this morning from your mother and brother. They're making some very serious allegations regarding your conduct outside of school." Mr. Harrison, please, it's a private family matter. I understand that, but they've mentioned legal proceedings and unstable behavior. Given your position as a teacher, I need you to take the rest of the week off as personal leave while this cools down. We can't have this drama following you into the classroom. I hung up, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on me. They were trying to cut off my legs. If I lost my job, I couldn't pay the taxes on the house. If they ruined my reputation, I'd have nowhere to go. I looked at the black nanny cam sitting on the counter. Not today, I thought. I showered, dressed in my sharpest navy blazer, and grabbed the heavy manila folder my father had given me a week before he passed. He had told me, "Vanessa, only open this if your siblings make things difficult. I hope you never have to." I drove to the downtown office of Mr. Arthur Henderson, my father's lifelong attorney and the only man Dad truly trusted. The office was old-fashioned, walls lined with green leather-bound books and the scent of peppermint and pipe tobacco. Mr. Henderson looked over his spectacles, his expression softening. "I saw the social media posts, Vanessa," he said quietly. "Your sister is thorough." "They broke into the house last night, Arthur," I said, sliding my phone across the desk. I played the footage of Kyle. He watched it in silence, his jaw tightening. "This is a felony, Vanessa. You could have him arrested right now." "Not yet," I said, my voice sounding colder than I recognized. "I want to know what's in the letter, the one Dad told me to bring to you." Arthur sighed and reached for a heavy brass key in his desk drawer. He walked over to a wall safe, pulled out a sealed envelope, and matched it with the folder I had brought. "Your father knew them better than they realized. He didn't just leave you the house, Vanessa. He left you a safety net. It's called a no-contest clause, but with a very specific, very sharp set of teeth." As I read the legal jargon, a slow, predatory smile spread across my face. It was better than I could have imagined. "They're planning another intervention tomorrow," I told Arthur. "They think they're coming to watch me sign that deed." "And what are you going to do?" I looked at the footage of my brother trashing my father's memory. "I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. But I'm going to need you to be there, Arthur, and I'm going to need a very specific set of papers drawn up."
The rain returned that afternoon, a cold, rhythmic drumming against the window panes that matched the steady beat of my heart. I spent the morning preparing the house. I didn't just clean it, I curated it. I placed the shattered photo of Dad and me prominently on the coffee table, a silent, jagged accusation. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, the steam rising in delicate curls, filling the air with the scent of bergamot that felt like a shield. At noon, I sent the text. I sent it to the group chat I had muted months ago. "Vanessa, I can't take it anymore. The school called. Everyone is looking at me like I'm a monster. You win. If the house is what it takes to have my family back, then take it. Come over at 6 p.m. Robert should bring the papers." The replies were almost instantaneous. Sarah, "Finally seeing sense, Van. It's for the best." Kyle, "Be there at 6. Don't make us wait." Mom, "I knew you'd do the right thing, honey. We just want what's fair." "Fair," I whispered to the empty kitchen. The word tasted like copper. I spent the next few hours working with Arthur. We weren't just drafting a refusal, we were setting a legal snare. To help me visualize the impact, Arthur had sketched out a flowchart of Dad's no contest clause. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering.
The logic was simple, but devastating. If any beneficiary challenged the distribution of the estate or attempted to coerce another beneficiary, their own share, the monthly stipends they relied on to fund their lifestyles, would be instantly forfeited and diverted to a charity of my choosing. By 5:45 p.m., Arthur was tucked away in the library, the heavy oak doors closed tight. I had 2 laptops open, one on the dining table, seemingly discarded, and another hidden in the kitchen, both linked to the house's security feed. At exactly 6 p.m., a pair of headlights cut through the rainy gloom of the driveway. Then another. They didn't knock. Kyle used his stolen key, the one he didn't know I knew he had. They marched into the living room like a conquering army. Kyle was wearing a smug, lopsided grin. Sarah had her phone out, likely recording the moment of reconciliation for her followers, and Mom was draped in a faux fur coat, looking every bit the grieving matriarch finally receiving her due. "You look terrible, Vanessa," Sarah said, though her tone was bright, almost cheerful. She panned her phone camera around the room, pausing briefly on the shattered photo on the table. "Oh, did you drop that? How sad." "Let's just get this over with," I said, my voice intentionally trembling. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands tucked between my knees to hide the fact that they were perfectly still. Robert, the notary from the restaurant, stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as he laid the quitclaim deed on the coffee table right next to the broken glass. "Vanessa, dear," Mom said, sitting beside me and reaching for my hand. I pulled it away, and her eyes flashed with a momentary coldness before the mask of pity returned. "Once you sign this, the social media posts go down. We'll tell the school it was all a big misunderstanding. We can be a family again." "A family," I whispered to the empty kitchen. The word tasted like copper. "Is that what you call what you did to Dad's study? Is that what you call breaking into my home while I was at dinner?" The room went deathly silent. Kyle's foot stopped mid-tap. His face drained of color, turning a pasty, sickly gray. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kyle stammered, his bravado vanishing. "I think you do," I said, standing up. "I wasn't the quiet teacher anymore. I was my father's daughter. But before we talk about that, I have something I want you to see. A final gift from Dad." I walked over to the television mounted above the fireplace. My heart was a steady drum in my chest, no longer the frantic fluttering of a victim, but the rhythmic march of a soldier. I picked up the remote. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" Mom asked, her voice sharp with a sudden nervous edge. "We don't have time for home movies. Robert has a schedule to keep." "This won't take long," I said, clicking the play button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a movie. It was the high-definition feed from my study. The timestamp in the corner read 7:48 p.m. yesterday. The room watched in a suffocating silence as Kyle appeared on screen. We watched him tear through the drawers. We watched him curse as he threw Dad's books. And then the audio kicked in, his voice, loud and clear, discussing the plan with Mom on his cell phone. "I can't find it, Mom. She must have moved it. We'll just make the house unlivable." Kyle's face on the screen was panicked. Kyle's face in the living room was crimson. He looked like he was about to explode. That's a violation of privacy," Sarah shrieked, finally dropping her phone. "You can't record people in their own—" "In my home?" I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave. "Actually, Sarah, in this state, I have every right to record inside my own residence, especially when a felony is being committed. Vanessa, honey, Mom started, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control of the narrative. Kyle he was emotional. He was looking for a memento. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I clicked the remote again. A second file opened. This video was different. It wasn't a security feed. It was a pre-recorded message. My father sat in his favorite armchair, the very one I had just straightened that morning. He looked frail, his skin like parchment, but his blue eyes, my eyes, were sharp and clear. Hello, Eleanor, Kyle, Sarah. Dad's voice filled the room, weary but firm. If you're watching this, it means Vanessa has had to use the fail-safe. It means you couldn't just let her grieve. It means you chose greed over the sister who actually stayed by my side until the end. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. I knew your characters, Dad continued on the screen. I knew your debts, Kyle. I knew your vanity, Sarah. And Eleanor, I knew you never truly appreciated the quiet strength of our youngest daughter. Because of that, I had Arthur Henderson include a very specific provision in my will. It's a no contest clause, and it's triggered by any attempt at coercion or illegal entry regarding this estate. Dad leaned closer to the camera, his expression one of profound disappointment. Vanessa, if they are in that room with you right now, tell them the news. I'm sorry it had to come to this. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air out of my lungs. Then the library doors at the end of the hall opened. Arthur Henderson stepped out, holding a silver briefcase. He looked like a judge approaching the bench. What is he doing here? Kyle growled, though the fight was clearly draining out of him. He's here to notarize something, I said, looking Robert in the eye. The small man in the cheap suit looked like he wanted to vanish into the upholstery. But it's not the quitclaim deed. Arthur opened the briefcase and pulled out 3 identical sets of documents. As of 5 minutes ago, Arthur announced, his voice booming in the small room, Vanessa has officially filed the evidence of your break-in and the recordings of your attempted extortion. According to the no contest provision of George's will, your monthly stipends, the $3,000 each of you receives from the secondary trust, are now permanently revoked. What? Sarah screamed. That's my car payment. That's my rent. It's already done, Arthur said coolly. The funds have been redirected to the Columbus Hospice Center effective immediately. You are also being served with formal notices of trespassing and harassment. Mom stood up, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You little bitch, you're going to leave your own mother with nothing after everything I gave you. You didn't give me anything, Mom. Dad gave you a home and a generous allowance. All you had to do was leave me in peace, but you wanted the whole pie. Now you don't even get the crumbs.
The living room, once a place of childhood holidays and quiet evenings, had transformed into a courtroom. My mother's face was a distorted mask of fury, her skin blotchy under the expensive foundation. "You think you've won?" she spat, taking a step toward me. Her voice was a low, vibrating growl. "I brought you into this world, Vanessa. I made you. Everything you have belongs to me by right." "Actually," Arthur Henderson interrupted, his voice like dry parchment, "everything she has belongs to her by the law of the state of Ohio and the final recorded wishes of George Miller. And right now, you are all trespassing." As if on cue, the low, rhythmic pulse of blue and red lights began to dance against the rain-streaked windows. I'd called the local precinct an hour before they arrived, explaining the situation and the evidence of the break-in. The heavy thud of boots on the porch echoed through the foyer. I opened the door to find 2 officers in rain-slicked uniforms.
"Is there a problem here, Miss Miller?" the older officer asked, his eyes immediately sweeping the room and landing on Kyle, who was still hovering near the fireplace, looking like he wanted to bolt. "These individuals were just leaving," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "I have video evidence of a residential burglary committed by that man yesterday, and I have the paperwork for a temporary restraining order against all three." The shift in the room was instantaneous. The arrogance that had fueled them for weeks evaporated, replaced by a frantic, scrambling desperation. "Wait, wait!" Kyle shouted, putting his hands up as the younger officer stepped toward him. "It's a misunderstanding. It's my house. Well, it's my mom's house." "It is Vanessa Miller's house," Arthur corrected firmly, handing a copy of the deed to the officer. "And that man is the one caught on 4K video destroying the study and searching for legal documents." Kyle looked at Mom, his eyes wide with a pathetic, childish terror. "Mom, do something! You said she wouldn't have the guts. You said she'd just cry and sign it." "Me?" Mom shrieked, turning on her own son with the same venom she'd used on me. "You're the one who couldn't find a simple piece of paper. You're the one who tripped the security. You've always been a useless, entitled boy, Kyle." "Oh, like you didn't spend your entire savings account on that Botox and the country club membership?" Sarah chimed in, her voice shrill and panicked. "We're broke because of you, Mom, and now Vanessa's taken the only thing we had left." I watched them. I watched my family tear each other apart over the carcass of a fortune that was never theirs to begin with. It was a pathetic display, a circle of sharks biting each other because the blood in the water was their own. "Officers," I said, my heart feeling heavy but certain, "please escort them out. I don't want to press charges for the break-in if they leave now and never contact me again. If they step foot on this property or call my employer ever again, I want the full weight of the law brought down on them." The officers didn't need to be told twice. They gripped Kyle and Sarah by the arms. Mom followed, her head held high in a final delusional attempt at dignity, though her hands were shaking so hard she could barely clutch her purse. As they reached the door, Mom stopped. She turned back, her blue eyes, so much like mine, filled with a cold, hollow emptiness. "You're just like your father. Cold, calculating. You'll die in this house all alone, Vanessa." If being like Dad means having integrity and protecting what's right, then I'll take being alone over being with any of you. The door clicked shut. The sound of the rain took over, muffled and distant. I stood in the center of the foyer, the silence returning to the house. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence from before. It was the silence of a clean slate.
The silence that followed their departure wasn't like the heavy, expectant quiet before a storm. It was the silence after the fever breaks, cool, clean, and a little bit hollow. Arthur Henderson stayed for a while, helping me navigate the immediate paperwork. He sat at the mahogany desk, his presence a grounding force against the lingering echo of my mother's screams. "You did well, Vanessa," he said, clicking his pen shut. "Your father would have been proud of the way you stood your ground. He always said you were the one with the architect's soul. You look for the foundation, not just the facade." "I just wanted the truth to be enough for once," I whispered, staring at the empty hallway. After Arthur left, I walked through every room of the house. I touched the banister, the window frames, the scars on the kitchen table where Kyle and I used to do our homework. It was a beautiful home, but as I looked at the spot where the police had stood, I realized I didn't want it anymore. This house was a blueprint of a life that no longer existed. It was a museum of my father's love, but also of my family's betrayal. I spent the next month moving with a singular, quiet purpose. I put the Craftsman on the market.
It sold in 3 days to a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever, people who would fill these halls with laughter instead of litigation. I used a portion of the proceeds to establish the George Miller Architecture Scholarship at the local community college. The rest went toward a small 2-bedroom cottage 3 towns over. It was nestled on the edge of a forest, with a porch that overlooked a meadow of wildflowers. It was tiny, it was humble, and it was entirely mine. On my final night in the big house, I sat on the porch steps one last time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a string of missed calls and unknown numbers. I knew who they were. Without the monthly stipends, the calls had shifted from rage to begging. Sarah had sent an email 2 days ago asking for just a small loan to keep her boutique from folding. I didn't feel a surge of triumph as I looked at the screen. I just felt finished. One by one, I went through my contact list. Mom, blocked. Kyle, blocked. Sarah, blocked. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and coming autumn filling my lungs. I looked at the key in my hand, the key to the cottage. It was small and silver, and it felt heavier than the house I was leaving behind. Inheritance isn't just about what someone leaves you in a will, it's about what they leave inside you. My father didn't just leave me a house or a trust fund, he left me the knowledge that I was enough. He left me the strength to say no when the world demanded yes. I walked to my car, tossed my bag in the passenger seat, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl taking care of everyone else's needs. I was the woman taking care of her own peace. As I pulled into the gravel driveway of my new cottage, the sun was just beginning to rise. The birds were starting their morning chorus, and for the first time in months, I found myself whistling right back.